Okay, everyone, greetings from Puerto Rico. So I'm Dan Nicholson. I'm currently a postdoc at the University of Texas at Arlington, but I'm going to briefly discuss my findings from my PhD at Queen Mary University of London and the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about how organisms can overcome change by evolution. So evolution was always thought historically as this slow, lumbering leviathan of a concept, taking millions upon millions of years to happen. But we now know that this is not true. And even as early as the 1950s, studies were starting to show that when animals are influenced by external forces, that they can actually adapt and overcome these new forces in a very short time frame. So John Endler changed predation rates in guppy fish in Trinidad in the 50s and found that males and females were able to change color and change their life history patterns very quickly in just a couple of generations to basically overcome these changes in their environment. A perfect historical example is from the 70s, where the Grants noticed that after a huge drought in the Galapagos, that the Galapagos finches were able to change their beak size in just one generation to be able to adapt to this change in environment. And these traits were all found to be heritable, therefore it's technically classed as evolution. So it turns out that Darwin himself was wrong, because Darwin himself stated that evolution only happens on geological time frames, so millions of years. But we now know that it's much faster than that. It's not even hundreds of years. It's not always decades. Sometimes it can be, depending on the organism, just one generation. So just a few years or even less than that. So what does this mean for contemporary studies? What does this mean for evolutionary studies? What does this mean for conservation, ecology? So that basically means that now we can look at how evolution can mitigate very rapid issues. So anthropogenic issues, for instance, climate change, invasive species, pollution. We can now see what happens when species are introduced to all of these novel factors, whereas originally we probably would have thought that they would go extinct. So this kind of gives us a whole new aspect of looking at how species can deal with all of the factors that we throw at them from the Anthropocene. Oh, and it started raining again. I thought I managed to get away from the rain, but it looks like it's back. So one of the questions that I was most focused on for my PhD and what I really wanted to study was how do abrupt changes in habitat structure affect behavior and morphological traits. So behavior is an interesting one because in the terms of evolution, people don't know if it basically drives evolution or hinders evolution. So basically there's these two theories. One, that behavior basically drives evolution because it kind of helps individuals get these new traits, and behavior is part of evolutionary biology. Or that behavior can prevent evolution because animals don't need to evolve. They don't need to change their traits, their morphology, if they can just alter their behavior. So we decided to sort of see how behavior interacts with morphology after individuals are exposed to a new environment. So I work on anoles. It's a hugely speciose group, so I think there's nearly 300 species of anole across South, North America, and the Caribbean. So yeah, I work on Anolis apletophalus, the Panamanian slender anole. This is a perfect study organism. It's the most abundant vertebrate in the forest. So if you want to counteract smaller sample sizes, anoles are the way forward. So basically what we did was we took hundreds of lizards from mainland Panama. So yeah, down here you can see we have the we have the Panama Canal here, and then we have Lake Gatun, which actually constitutes most of the canal, and then we have the northern part of the canal here. So yes, this Lake Gatun was formed when the canal was made, and essentially it was a valley that they then flooded to produce most of the canal, and then the mountaintops became these islands. And I should stress that these islands are very small. So our smallest one is about 20 by 20 meters, and one of our largest ones I think is 60 by 70 meters. So these islands are not huge islands. So we basically captured hundreds of individuals from the mainland, measured as much about them as we could, so morphology, physiology, we took some DNA, we even marked them so every individual could be tracked over the coming weeks on the islands, and then we introduced them 70 at a time to numerous small islands on the Panama Canal. So 35 of each sex transplanted to each island. Okay, so here's a nice short video, just basically giving you some drone footage just to see basically what we're looking at. So this is our smallest island over here. This is Island F, and then we're going to pan around. So this is all Lake Gatun here. And then at the back here is where the Panama Canal goes, and this is all mainland. So yeah, here we can see a container ship going through the Panama Canal, and then this is there, and then here at the back is BCI. This is Island D, one of our larger islands, and then here's Island C, which is our largest island, and then I'm down here driving the boat. So one of the first things we found was a change in behavior. So in just 6 weeks, individuals had changed their behavior from the mainland to be using different perches on the islands. So you can just see here a representation of what is available to the lizards in each site, so the mainland, and then what was substantially used by the lizards. So on the mainland you can see there are much more thinner perches, much more narrower perches, whereas on the islands it's mostly larger trees, and the habitat use is changing to basically compensate for this. So you can see the habitat used on the islands, they're using much more wider perches than they were using on the mainland. So just to kind of tease that apart a little bit better, so here we can see the perch diameter, so the width of the trees that they are using are much thicker on all three of the islands, and this goes for perch height as well. They are perching much lower, so closer to the ground on the islands than they are on the mainland. And this is just within 6 weeks. So we released them in July, and then when we started going back in September to resurvey these islands and recapture these individuals, we found that they were perching on wider trees and perching much closer to the ground. So as a result of this behavioral change, we see a stark morphological change in just one generation. So just in the next year, we saw a change in morphology. So here in panel A, you can see these are all the individuals that were caught in 2017 and the islands that they were then moved to. So you can see that their morphology completely overlapped. So green, yellow and blue represent the islands, and purple is the mainland. And then you can see in panel B, this is the next generation. So just the next year in 2018, all the individuals we caught on the islands, you can see that they're moving away in morphospace from the mainland. So you're seeing this morphological divergence in just 1 year. Yeah, so just to briefly run down some of the changes that we're seeing more specifically. So here we can see a increase in limb length size. So we do see that this change is also present on the mainland, but on two of the islands the magnitude is much higher. Don't really see a change in forelimb length, and then for toe pads at the front and at the back, as well as head depth, we see a huge reduction in size compared to the mainland. So yeah, the head depth, for example, was 10% smaller. The heads were 10% smaller in the following generation. So just in 1 year, the heads have become 10% smaller. And then in panel F, we just see an overall percentage of the amount of trait change. So you can see that it's much higher on the islands than it is on the mainland. So just to summarize our findings, in one generation, we were able to see an increase in hind limb length. So we think that this is related to their perch width. So basically they're perching on wider trees, which means their legs need to be longer to be able to move quicker and more efficiently on these surfaces. We see smaller toe pads. So basically toe pads are indicative with leaf usage. So if the individuals aren't using leaves, they don't need these adhesive toe pads as much. So perching lower in the canopy means they're not using leaves as much, so they don't need larger toe pads. And then a decrease in head depth, which was our most substantial change. So we think this is related to diet. So they're on different islands and they're perching lower down in the canopy, closer to the ground. So we think that their diet is smaller, so their heads have shrunk to cope with that. And they might also be competing less with each other, so they don't need larger heads for combat. So the take-home message is that species can adapt to rapid changes in habitat, and it's likely that behavior is driving these changes. So behavioral drive causes morphological change, which can cause individuals to be better adapted for their environment. So here we saw a rapid change in behavior, which then led to morphological changes, which we believe are going to be adaptive. We can't test this just yet, but that's basically our main finding. So yeah, a huge amount of people to thank for this project. Hundreds of man hours have been put into it. So yeah, thank you for everyone involved. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions.